Hey, what's going on everyone? Welcome to the video. Today we'll be talking about creatine. So creatine, specifically creatine monohydrate, it's one of the most studied supplements out there. We know it's widely used in the fitness industry, and it actually may be an excellent addition to your current training regimen. So let's get to it. If you haven't heard about creatine yet, then you must be one of those lucky ones who did not come across those creatine preachers at your local gym. If you don't mention it to everyone that you're taking creatine, are you even taking creatine, bro? The creatine industry global market was at $400 million in the year 2020, and it's actually expected to grow up to $600 million by 2026. Now, damn, that's a lot of creatine preachers in these local gyms. So what is creatine currently being used for? The most common use we hear about creatine use is for improving exercise performance, training adaptations, enhancing post-workout recovery. But creatine is also being utilized in a variety of different areas besides just making gains. So some examples: injury prevention and recovery. Some neurological conditions it's being studied in, such as Parkinson's disease, Huntington's disease, fibromyalgia, and it's also being studied in creatine deficiency disorder, aging, and diabetes. What exactly is creatine? Creatine is known as methylguanidine acetic acid.
Yes, science!
I know, that's a pretty big word, isn't it? And it's naturally produced in our bodies from the amino acids arginine, glycine, and methionine in the kidneys and the liver. Here's the chemical structure of creatine. On the left-hand side, we have creatine, and then we have the byproduct after creatine gets broken down. Now, I know you thought, based on that fancy scientific name, you thought the structure would be something cool to look like testosterone or estrogen or something like that. Nope, it's a pretty simple structure. Now, majority of creatine, which is about 95% of it, is stored in the skeletal muscles, with a small amount of it found in the brain. In males, there's a small amount stored in the testes. Now, about 1 to 2% of these creatine stores are used up and degraded into that creatinine byproduct that I just showed you on the screen, and it's excreted as urine. So we typically need to replenish about 1 to 3 grams of creatine per day. So whether it's if we get it from replenishment from foods or the amino acids that we consume and our body makes it, or we can supplement it. Now, with that being said, naturally, our creatine stores are about 60 to 80% saturated. Now, creatine supplementation will help increase that saturation mark to close to about 90%. Probably wondering, so what foods can I get creatine from? Well, the number one thing is making sure you eat a higher protein diet with rich amino acid profile. So, we're looking for those 3 specific amino acids: arginine, glycine, and methionine. Your body will then naturally produce creatine from that. But then there are some foods that will specifically contain creatine that your body can use and store. And these foods are various meats and fish. So for example, we have red meat, specifically uncooked beef, contains about 5 grams per kilogram. And I mean 5 grams of creatine per kilogram. 100 grams of cod contains about 1.2 to 2.3 grams of creatine. You're not going to get this full creatine content. Now, why aren't you going to get this full creatine content from meat? Because when you cook meat and when you cook these products, it actually degrades creatine, so you get a little bit less creatine from that product. So the next topic that I want to just address is creatine steroids?
Please, I don't have any time for any gossip now. Eh? Yes.
That is bro science nonsense, and we have to break and bust this bro science right now. So let's get this straight and nerd out a little bit about how creatine works. Dig back into your biology brain, doesn't have to be advanced biology, and try to recall our form of energy that our body uses called ATP, adenosine triphosphate. Now, ATP fuels all of the metabolic actions in our bodies. This includes muscle contractions. This includes making sure our nervous system functions properly, our digestive system functions properly, all of our metabolic reactions in our body, digestive enzymes are, processing our food and working properly. Now, when ATP serves its purpose, it breaks down into an inactive form called adenosine diphosphate, also known as ADP, plus releasing an inorganic phosphate. Now, this entire thing is completely useless. The ADP plus inorganic phosphate, we can't use that as energy. We eventually have to replenish it. Now, after an extensive workout, our ATP stores start to run low in our skeletal muscles, and we have less fuel to perform work, whether that's sprinting, weightlifting, cycling, whatever your activity is. Now, we have all of this ADP hanging out in our body and our skeletal muscles that needs to be restored, and it takes some time to actually fully restore that ADP to the ATP again, which is the usable form of the energy. So this is where creatine comes into play. Creatine serves as that extra energy store in our muscles, and it's stored as phosphocreatine. Now, you're probably seeing a similarity here, this phosphate group, the adenosine triphosphate, inorganic phosphate, phosphocreatine. So phosphocreatine is a pretty readily available energy source that will help restore that ADP to ATP, and it serves as a catalyst to convert it really quickly. Once that ADP is restored to ATP by utilizing that phosphocreatine, leaves us with a few more ATPs to spare to continue repping out more reps, more sets. Now, this eventually won't go on forever because eventually the phosphocreatine gets depleted. Most of our ATP stores get depleted into ADP, so we need that rest period to recharge, regenerate our skeletal muscle ATPs, and as well the phosphocreatine. Now, here's busting the bro science. Creatine is not steroids. It has no direct impact on stimulating muscle growth, no impact on testosterone levels, or no impact on growth hormone. Now, I want to specify here, no direct impact. It has an indirect impact on all of these things because it simply allows you to perform more work. When you perform more work over time, pounding out more reps, pounding out more weight, increasing your PRs, eventually this leads to hypertrophy and adaptations in skeletal muscles. What that means, that's gains, baby, gains.
I feel the best right here in this area, okay?
Outer head of the bicep.
Now don't freak out when you see these biceps, okay?
Creatine supplementation is not required if you don't have any nutritional deficiencies, if you're eating a proper diet, because our body does a fantastic job maintaining those creatine stores and our skeletal muscle stores being saturated to about 60 to 80%. Whereas creatine supplementation, the way it steps in is it's kind of like that cherry on top. So you have your nutrition all set, you have your proper training regimen set, now you can stack on creatine. Creatine will help bring those saturation stores above 80% saturation. So now that we talked about how creatine works, let's talk a little bit about the benefits of creatine supplementation, and our main focus will be on fitness. So when supplementing creatine, it increases the amount of work performed during sets of maximal muscle contractions. It increases muscle mass and strength training adaptations. It increases the anaerobic threshold. It enhances the recovery, and then greater training tolerance. Now I want to jump into the literature a little bit just to kind of show you guys that, creatine is one of the most studied supplements out there. So there was a review article published by CREATINE in 2003 studying the effects of creatine supplementation on performance and training adaptations. They reviewed 300 studies that have evaluated the potential ergogenic value of creatine supplementation, so meaning the benefits of creatine supplementation on, enhancing strength performance and recovery. What they found was that it had a pretty significant improvement in maximal power and strength, so about 5 to 15%. The amount of work performed during sets of maximal effort muscle contractions was increased about 5 to 15%. Single effort sprint performance increased about 1 to 5%. And work performed during repetitive sprint performance also increased about 5 to 15%. Now, what they also found was that creatine supplementation during training has been reported to promote significantly greater gains in strength, fat-free muscle mass, and perform primarily of high-intensity exercise tasks. Now, there was another review article posted by the same author creator and also his colleagues, which was published in a pretty big journal, which is the Journal of the International Society of Sports Nutrition. And this was published in 2017, which compiled all of the evidence for creatine supplementation up until 2017. Now, what they found was when reporting the ergogenic effects of creatine supplementation, there's a large body of evidence now indicating that creatine supplementation increases muscle availability of creatine and phosphocreatine, and therefore can enhance acute exercise capacity and training adaptations in adolescents, younger adults, and older individuals. Now, these training adaptations would allow an individual to do more work over a series of sets or sprints, leading to greater gains in strength, muscle mass, and or performance due to an improvement in the quality of training. So yet again, like we mentioned before, creatine is not a steroid. It has more of an indirect effect on all of these gains that you're making because you're increasing the amount of workload you're dealing with. You're increasing the amount of reps that you're dealing with. It's helping you put more output into your workouts. And for all of these studies that I cover in my videos, I will always include a link to these articles in the description below, just in case if you're a little bit more curious and want to go into a little bit more digging on some of this evidence. Now that we reviewed what creatine is, how it works, and what training benefits it may provide, we can talk about how to take creatine. Now, the typical recommendation and also my recommendation is to supplement creatine monohydrate. That is the formulation of creatine that is the most studied out there. It's backed by the most evidence. It was the form of creatine used in a lot of these clinical trials. Now, the dosing phase is broken down into two parts. The first part is the creatine loading dose, which you typically hear about. And this is loading up the creatine into your body a little bit faster over the next 5 to 7 days. So this schedule is broken down into 20 to 25 grams of creatine per day, taken for 5 to 7 days. Now that 20 grams or the 25 grams, it's a pretty big dose. So typically you could spread it over throughout the day. So you can take about 5 grams 4 times a day. So you could do breakfast, lunch, afternoon, and then dinner time, and spread this out over 5 to 7 days. Now, I know that what I'm about to say might stir up a lot of controversy here, but the loading dose is not required. And in the end, if you skip the loading dose, you'll still make some long-term gains on creatine. And I'll be making a separate video explaining the purpose of what the loading dose is, so just keep an eye out for that. Well then, after the loading dose, the creatine maintenance dose is what started, which is typically 3 to 5 grams of creatine per day. Now, if you'd like to get a little bit more scientific, a little bit more detail-oriented here, you can dose your creatine based on your total body weight, and that is dosed by 0.04 grams per kilogram per day. Now, for an individual that weighs about 180 pounds, that's typically 3 grams of creatine per day, whereas the standard dosing on the labels you see is 5 grams of creatine per day. So it won't really hurt you much if you just take the standard 5 grams of creatine per day, but if you want to get a little bit more scientific, tailor it down towards your, specific body, you can dose it based on the grams per kilogram. And then, of course, if you decide to skip the loading dose, you can pretty much just start here and start off with the maintenance dose of just taking that 3 to 5 grams of creatine per day. A lot of discussion out there of whether you should take creatine with carbs, or you take it on an empty stomach with just water. Should you take it with orange juice with plenty of carb loading before you take creatine? So the same authors, Crater and his colleagues in the Journal of ISSN, what they found was creatine supplementation with carbohydrate or carbohydrate and protein has been reported to promote greater muscle glycogen storage than carbohydrate supplementation alone. So typically what they recommend is taking creatine with carbohydrates and protein, but the reasoning behind that is not because you'll absorb more creatine. The reasoning behind that is it'll actually help promote recovery by storing more glycogen, by repleting more glycogen after training. Now, what about the safety of creatine? You may be asking, Jake, we talked about all of this evidence. You're saying creatine's good for gains, but what about for my health? I hear a lot of things out there saying, it might damage my kidneys, it might damage my liver. So let's talk about that. Since the 1900s, there were over 1,000 studies conducted on billions of servings of creatine. Now, a summary of what was found. Weight gain was the most commonly reported side effect, and this could apply it could be from the creatine, it could be from the increase in muscle mass that you get from training harder, it could be from the increased training output, maybe you're drinking a lot more water, and also dietary changes. But that was the most commonly reported, what you want to list if it's like a side effect. Some people also complain a little bit about like stomach upset and nausea. I know when I was taking creatine, If I was just taking it with just straight water, it would upset my stomach a little bit. So I would just take it with a little bit of carbohydrates and protein, and it solved that problem, just having a little bit of something in your stomach. Now, creatine doses ranging from 0.3 to 0.8 grams per kilograms per day. That's a pretty whopping dose. That's as if you were taking 25 to 65 grams of creatine per day for up to 5 years. Showed no threat to health risk in these clinical trials. As far as concerns of effects on kidneys, a study out there by Portman and coworkers, they reported that ingesting 20 grams of creatine per day for 5 days and then up to 10 grams per day for up to 10 months to 5 years had no effect on creatinine clearance, glomerular filtration rate, tubular resorption, or glomerular membrane permeability compared to controls. Now, those are a lot of scientific terms. What that pretty much means is that by supplementing creatine, it had no effect on your kidney function. And kidney function is typically measured by measuring your creatinine clearance, by measuring your glomerular filtration rate to see how well your kidneys are processing and filtering things. It had no impairment on those values. There you have it. Well, that's enough preaching about creatine for me. I hope this video will help you make the best decision for yourself, whether creatine supplementation fits into your training regimen and nutrition regimen, and to help you achieve your individual fitness goals. I hope you enjoyed this video today. I thank you so much for watching and being here. If you liked this video, go ahead and give me a thumbs up. Go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss any additional videos that I will be posting in the future. And I will see you in the next video.